Back when I was attending university, I used to work on campus at one of the dining halls during the dinner or night shift. I lived in the next town over since it was cheaper to live in a crappy little apartment out of town than to live on campus in the dorms. But I didn't own a car, so I had to take the bus to commute. One night, I had just gotten off a shift at work. My feet were killing me and I was completely exhausted, and I slowly made my way to the bus stop. I noticed a man much older than me sitting on one of the two benches at the otherwise empty bus stop, but I didn't pay too much attention to him. I simply sat down on the second bench and listened to some music while waiting for the bus to arrive. The first sign that things were starting to get weird was when I kept noticing out of the corner of my eye that he was staring at me. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, so I looked over and caught him quickly turning his head to look away. Okay, so he was staring at me. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary since being a young college girl seemed to gain me a bit of attention from older men. So like usual, I just ignored him. That was a mistake. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him look at me. But instead of just staring at me this time, he got up and walked over to sit next to me instead. I continued listening to my music, hoping that he would see my headphones in and take the hint that I wasn't interested in talking. But instead, the man literally took them out of my ear. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said as my head snapped to look at him in shock. I should have told him off for touching my things and demanded that he leave me alone, but I was sort of frozen, and I didn't want to make him mad. Hi," I replied quietly. He started introducing himself as Mike and telling me that he lived in the area, and that it was always nice to see pretty girls like me at the university bus stop. He explained that he was a real man, unlike the boys that I went to school with, and that I should go home with him that night. I was a shy, scared girl who had never had a man be as bold as this to my face. I say to my face because I had certainly got my fair share of unsolicited private pictures online by that point. But I digress. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. But that didn't stop Mike from continuing to explain to me all of the fun things he wanted to do with me at his place that night. At that point, I wished that I was anywhere else but that bus stop. But it was just the two of us in the dark alone, as I counted these seconds until the bus would arrive. And then Mike took things to a different level of shocking by telling me, "Listen, the demons want me to ask for your phone number, and they say that you should give it to me or you won't like what happens." He actually had the audacity to start stroking my hair. His hand was gentle, but I didn't want him touching me at all. And this was shocking for a number of reasons. The demons, I wouldn't like what would happen. Why was he touching me? What the heck was this guy talking about? As though he could read my mind, Mike went on to explain. "My therapist knows the demons are real. I told her about them and she says that I'm not crazy and that the demons are real." He laughed and then abruptly stopped. "No, give me your phone number like they said," he demanded. As his hand stroked my hair for the last time, he stopped and gripped the back of my neck. Still gentle but even more terrifying. I was scared, and obviously didn't want him to have my phone number. But he was taking out his phone and I knew that he was going to call the number I gave him to make sure that I wasn't lying to him. And he still had his hand on the back of my neck. So I reluctantly gave him my real phone number. It's stupid, I know. But I was right, and he immediately called a check. All I could think about was just not making this guy angry long enough to get away from him, and then I would block his number. Thankfully, the bus came moments later. I sat down as close to the front of the bus near the bus driver as I possibly could, since the bus was basically empty. Mike decided to sit directly across from me. At this point, I tried listening to music again, hoping that being on the bus and him having my phone number would signal to him to end our conversation. However, he decided to reach over and unzip my sweatshirt, revealing my work shirt and the name tag, which I had unfortunately forgotten to remove in my haste to leave work that night. I hadn't told him my name yet. Abigail, what a beautiful name. Our daughter will be named Celeste." I shouldn't have been shocked at this point, but I was. I had stopped listening to music again and zipped my sweatshirt back up, which made him laugh. "You won't need that soon anyway," he said, and he winked at me, implying how he had planned to do what he wanted to do further that night. At one stop, Mike tried to convince me to get off the bus with him. I told him no, that I was tired and just wanted to go home, and so he said okay and he stayed on the bus. I knew that had to be a stop, so the fact that he was staying in the bus worried me. I was sure this meant that he was planning on coming home with me instead. "Baby," Mike whispered to me. I tried to ignore him, but he repeated himself louder. "Baby." He had the most unsettling smile on his face as I asked, "What?" He laughed and told me, "The demons say you smell nice." I was terrified and felt like I was going to throw up by the time my bus stop arrived. I lived in an apartment alone and I didn't want to know where I lived. Despite my body being exhausted and sore from work, adrenaline kicked in and I bolted off the bus and ran straight home. I made it inside and locked the door. I looked through the peephole and I didn't see him, so I went carefully to peek out of my window and saw him standing near the bus stop, looking around. He took out his phone and sure enough, I started getting a call from an unknown number since I hadn't saved his number. I ignored it. When he hung up, I started getting several texts, asking where I had gone, how he didn't like hide and seek, and how the demons just wanted to have fun. I was so scared because he knew which apartment building I lived in, where I worked and where I went to school, my phone number and my name. The only good thing which made me feel slightly relieved was that he didn't know which specific apartment number I lived in. And that's when he started yelling outside. There were no specific words said, just wordless yells of what I could only assume were frustration and anger. I blocked his number and I kept all the lights in my apartment off as I cried with my back to the front door. Maybe I should have called the police, but my brain was so frazzled that I didn't even think of that until the next day. And by then, all I knew about him was that he was a mentally unstable man, probably named Mike, who hadn't actually done any physical harm to me, so I didn't think that it was worth it. In hindsight, I know that I made a lot of stupid mistakes during his experience. I ended up moving away entirely at the end of that term of school for unrelated reasons, but until then, I switched to day shifts at work and was paranoid every night. Thankfully, I never saw the man again though. I'm not used to being alone, first things first. I have anxiety and struggle going places alone without friends or family. I live in Australia, so school started a few weeks ago. The way to school is one of the only things I can do by myself without freaking out. It's the same bus route every time with the same students that got on every time. I lived about an hour away from school, so I had to leave pretty early. It was 7:34 a.m. and the bus arrived. I sat in the back next to a girl with hair similar to mine, shoulder length and light dirt brown. We talked for about 20 minutes before she got off to go to her school, a different one from mine. I put my headphones in and listened to my music, had it blaring to distract myself from my growing anxiety. 12 minutes in, a man with greasy long brown hair sat across from me. He had a briefcase and was wearing a suit that hardly fit him. He looked professional yet messy. I paid no mind and continued listening to my music and scrolling through Reddit posts, Animal Crossing, Overwatch, and subreddits like that. Ones that take me into another world or a game away from reality. A bad idea in this situation. One song ended and I snapped back to reality for a few seconds. I looked up so that I didn't miss my spot, still about 45 minutes away. The man had moved spots and was now sitting 2 spots away from me, on the same row of the seats. I paid no attention. These seats were comfier. Heavy breathing could be heard from him, as I felt his glance on me and my school dress. A lump in my throat grew. Maybe an overreaction, but I'm terrified of being harassed or more. Hey, he said after roughly 5 minutes of staring. My eyes slowly moved to him as he glared at me, flicking between my face and my dress. Now, I'm 15 and in 9th grade, but I don't know if I look my age. I definitely don't look younger than 14. Now looking at me with my mask pulled up more, he asked what school I was going to. I told him it wasn't any of his business and I asked him to leave me alone. He didn't like this. He asked how old I was and I said 18. I don't know why, I just didn't want to tell him my real age. He moved closer, slowly reaching for my bag that has my school logo on it. I grabbed it and pretended to use it as a pillow. He scoffed and picked up his briefcase, thinking that I wasn't watching. I had glasses, so the screen on my phone hid them a tiny bit. He opened it and took out something small and silver. Now guns are illegal in Australia, so my mind switched to a knife. And my suspicions were slowly confirmed. Have you ever been hurt physically? He asked. I nodded. I mean, who hasn't? Especially in Australia. Bad? He asked. No, at least I can't remember. He laughed, forming a pit of fear and sadness in my stomach. I peered up and outside of the bus, still 20 minutes away. Students sat at the bottom of the bus. I didn't recognize anyone, but they could still serve as a way to away from being alone with this freaking creep. Yet I was too scared to move. I peered over at him and he was still staring, the small silver knife glistening in his suit pocket. You're pretty. Screw off, I thought. You can't even see half my face. I felt his eyes on my chest. My chest was definitely developed for my age. I had a fast metabolism, so I was skinny and had hardly any strength. Not unusual for a girl who spends most of her free time writing and gaming, or sleeping. You could tell from my arms. Not ridiculously skinny, but not the opposite either. He was talking about random stuff, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my heart beating in my ears. I took a deep breath and slowly came back to reality. It's a shame you have school. I live near here. Of course you do. I'm not a bad guy either. A stupid thing to say. He glared at me angrily like he could hear my thoughts. Emily, I heard. My best friend Lily stood on these steps to the back of the bus. I could see a smile of worry on her face as she placed her water bottle back in her bag. She was little, but she didn't take any crap and she always had my back. She gestured to come sit down with her and some familiar students. I grabbed my bag, covering the school logo with my hand. Once we sat down, I saw the creep staring still. He stared at me the whole ride until we got off at a stop before school so he couldn't find out. The bus was pretty full at this point, so he struggled to follow me. Once the bus left, I collapsed on the bench and cried on Lily's shoulder, relieved. I told her everything on the way to school. I knew that he was going to try to hurt me, possibly kill me, and I'm so grateful for my best friend's great timing. This happened to me when I was about 14. I was best friends with this girl Robin. We've long since parted ways, but I used to stay over at hers all the time. Robin was an only child to an older couple, both roughly about 60. Her house was old and the bedrooms were quite small. She had a thing for decorating her room and spooky things. It was overcrowded with trinkets and clothes, which looked really cool, but it meant that after we were finished watching trashies and 90s anime, you know, the good stuff, at 4 o'clock in the morning I would go to sleep in the spare bedroom, or I would risk suffocating under a pile of gothic teddy bears and Pokemon on her floor. One evening her parents went to the local pub just down the street with some old friends, so I stayed over. It was great. A free house for just the two of us, and they made sure that we had all the junk food that we could want. They were really sweet and always made sure that we felt safe before leaving. I should also mention that they never brought guests home, especially when their daughter had a friend over. For the most part, I had a great night. When it was time to eventually go to sleep, I went into what I called my room because I was there so often. It was small and just fit a wardrobe, a dresser, and a double bed, which, considering I had a single bed and shared a room with my sister, it was luxury. We would usually spend another hour sending each other DS PictoChat messages until one of us fell asleep. I curled up into bed and passed out pretty quick. Sometime around 4 a.m., I think, I awoke to someone fidgeting at the door handle. At first, I was a bit confused as Robin would always almost message me through PictoChat if she was going to come into my room. The door was rattling at this stage and I was a bit freaked. It lasted a couple of minutes, but then the rattling subsided. I rolled over and tried to calm myself down, thinking that it might have been her dad or mom making sure the door was closed. I don't know, I was confused. I'm not sure at this point if I fell asleep or what, but I didn't hear anyone entering the room. And then I hear this splashing sound. I remember thinking it was really loud and clear, and as these seconds went by, I realized this wasn't a part of a dream. This was something I was actually hearing. So, as I was facing the wall, I rolled my head around as silently as I could, and I could see this very tall man next to my bed, facing the corner. He was so close to me. He was tall, at least 6'3", and he had a thick black short haircut, and he was incredibly pale and toned. He looked to be in his early 30s or something, and he was wearing nothing but a pair of black boxers. What in the world? There was no way this could be her dad. While he was almost as tall as this guy, her dad was visibly older, had silver hair, and the top of his head was bald. There was no way anyone could confuse him with this guy. I was in shock. I had no idea what was happening, and I remember feeling my heart in my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I just stared in shock for a couple of seconds and then, as quiet as I could, turned back around and just pretended to be asleep. I remember trying to control my breathing so he wouldn't notice me. Eventually he left and I was awake for what felt like an hour, too afraid to move. I didn't know who this guy was and if he was still outside my door. Did he see me? If he saw me, what would he do? I didn't hear anyone else in the house. There was no talking and the walls in this house were paper thin. When I eventually worked up the nerve, I darted into Robin's room and broke down. I was panicking and she just kept laughing at me, saying I was being ridiculous. I was lying. I was just having a nightmare. She told me to go back to bed, and I refused to go into the room. I didn't feel safe. She rolled her eyes and we both went into the room. She looked around and suddenly started shrieking. She had just stepped into a puddle of pee. I told you, it was everywhere. It was on the wardrobe, on the dresser, and soaked into the carpet. At that point, she was just as confused as I was. Even so, it was 5 a.m., so she grabbed my pillow and blanket from the room, and I gladly took my chance with the Teddy Avalanche and slept on her floor. The next morning, I remember being incredibly wary of her dad. There was no other male figure around, and they weren't the kind of people to have people over, especially when their daughter had guests over, so I directed my fear and confusion at him. I knew it wasn't him though, but at that point, I was just so anxious around any kind of male figure. I remember sitting around the breakfast table and Robin still wasn't sure what to make of it. Somehow part of her didn't want to believe me, even when she saw the evidence for herself. I didn't say anything to her parents, and neither did she. I went home scared, confused, and out of my friends and family, no one seemed to believe me. It wasn't until recently that I retold the story to a group of friends and my best friend, who I was friends with at the time, and they reacted with, "Wait, that was real? We all thought you were just making it up." Later on, my sister told me that the houses in the area are connected through the attics, and that you can get from one house to another. Maybe somebody crawled through there and gotten in. But why were they almost naked? And did they know that I was there? I never really understood what happened. Needless to say, I never slept in that room and never slept alone in that house ever again. So yeah, person who broke into my room and peed all over the place. I hope I don't see you again.